He is mass sending comic books to increase pipe gen. To everyone in his book, they are personalized. I do not like updating Salesforce. I don't think it's the most valuable part of my time. We have 1,000 skills sprawling across our workspace. I heard about this incredible new model. It's so smart. Let me throw everything at it. I candidly am not great at SQL. That was the reason I joined Dust. And I think it often, once you kind of get past that first hurdle of fear, it all becomes
Hey everybody, it is Andy Mowat from GTM Council here with my co-host, co-founder Noah Marks for the Stacked GTM podcast. Today we're going to continue our deep dive into GTM engineering, and we've got a guest on the show that is their company Dust has been mentioned by a ton of our other guests, and so we're excited to have Gina Kabasakalis on with us to really deep dive into GTM engineering. How do you build agents that can work in what I've always termed multiplayer mode? Gina, welcome. It's great to have you.
Thank you for having me. Nice to be here.
I love it. Well, we don't ask many guests to do this, but I'd love to kick it off with just tell us what Dust is and what it's not, because I think it's been so fun to hear so many of our guests be using it. But me personally, have never used it. So I'd love you to just kind of explain to people what it is.
Yeah, of course. And I'm curious to hear all the episodes as they come out and hear all of the different definitions. I think it's an interesting one to question because I think people are always asking, is it search? Is it an agent builder? What is it a backend automations flow? And I think the hard part to often convey is it can be all of those in terms of problems it solves. I tend to think about it as AI operating system for work. And I think for most go-to-market teams, I really tend to think about it as the platform where you're going to be able to run the backend orchestration layer and also the kind of rep-facing co-pilot in the exact same platform.
I think that's what I've heard from a lot of our guests, which is I can go Claude code my own agent. But if
Yes.
I want to give it to 20 reps, that's going to be a challenge because those reps may not know how to auth in, do the variables, copy the GitHub and publish it themselves. And then do I really want them all doing that? And so it sounds like that is kind of the way a lot of people are finding you, which is how do I take an agent that's single player and make it multiplayer?
Yes, I think it is often at that point where people have tried a bunch of tools and I think hit the limits in other systems. And I think those limits come up in a bunch of different places. And I think 9 months ago, a year ago, it was, hey, I need to connect all my systems. That is hard. I think right now, a lot of more hearing is um, some people are super AI pilled. Some people are testing out a bunch of systems. Some are sprinting the rest. We're trying to bring up the middle. Others are, hey, we have 1,000 skills sprawling across our workspace. Um, we're struggling to get people moving in the right direction at the same time. And so I think people are shedding a bigger light on governance, authentication, permissions. And then I think also, um, with how much the models are changing, kind of a reemergence of wanting to be multi-model, multiplayer.
I couldn't agree more with all those. Governance is huge. Being able to have are you kind of like a factory in that sense, which is I can pick the model I want to be able to use, and are you intelligently picking which model to use yourselves?
Yeah, we are heavy Anthropic users internally. I think that our but I think you also want a fallback on all those systems. And so I think what people are starting to experiment more and more with is one, just different models for different tasks. And then I think also what is one workflow and are there parts of that that are often simpler that can be adjusted to a cheaper, faster model? And I think where a lot of people often start with us is, I heard about this incredible new model. It's so smart. Let me throw everything at it. And I think oftentimes teams are starting with smaller, faster workflows. So something like an Opus model isn't exactly what you would want for language translation. You might want something faster, quicker, cheaper. And so I think people are starting to have that conversation more. And so we provide recommendations, but I think a lot of people are often shifting towards high reasoning model on top, um, maybe something quicker, faster, cheaper for different subtasks underneath.
So again, these are a lot of the naive questions, which I love to answer because I haven't used Dust, but I've heard about it so much.
Yeah.
Am I building my agent on you? Or am I using this to kind of host agents that I built in a Claude code? I guess maybe I would think
Yeah.
of like a relevance might be another one,
Yeah.
which we had on either a podcast or one of our guests recently, where you can build agents across any part of the company. And so I'm curious, are you an agent builder or
Yes.
are you more of a platform to make the agents you built separately easier?
Yeah, I think a lot of teams will often migrate skills over to us. So that is possible. What I would think of is probably you are rebuilding everything in a platform like Dust. So sits on top of every model, you are connecting all of your company data. So definitely all the typical sales stack, Slack, Notion, Salesforce, Gong, so forth, all of the way to GitHub, Linear, Snowflake, so forth. Really underlying structure is permissions, all your company context, whatever model you want. Um, and then you can build whatever you would like on top of that.
That makes a sense. I feel like must have some amazing positioning slides that I'm dying to see, right? Because so that was one bucket. So
I will
yes, you
send them
are.
over after.
Yeah, please do, and anything you can share, and we happy to keep the ones confidential that are confidential. So that's one bucket of like agent builder.
Yep.
Clear. Now I get that, which is you're probably a more flexible agent builder if I were to describe it. And the
Yes.
second bucket, I think of like a Glean or an N8N. I'm
Yeah.
curious, are those in the alternative set that you see, or are they different? Because I used to see Glean as more like a knowledge search, but I'm seeing people build agents on top of that as well too. So I'm fascinated how you think about those as alternatives.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of things you're touching on there, and I think one is just like, where do we sit against and who is our competition? And I think by virtue of it being a horizontal tool, there are a lot out there, and I think it is often broken down into models themselves, enterprise search and information retrieval tool, vertical specific tools, and then whether you are going to build something internally. And I think those lines get fuzzy, especially as scope is changing.
Yes.
Um, as it compares to Glean, I think they are incredible at search. And so a lot of our customers often have them for search, often make it to a Dust. And I think there are often limitations in their agent builder, which people have found a little bit limiting as compared to Dust. I think for something like a Zapier and N8N, super powerful at workflow automations. I think the general feedback we hear is around it's still being a little too technical sometimes
Yep.
for the average individual. And I think for a lot of the customers we work with, they are growing incredibly quickly. They are rapidly scaling. Their goals are to double their headcount. And I think we've often seen that a workflow builder is often very rigid. And so I think as if you kind of limit the ability to build and adjust workflows to only the most technical people, I think one, you gate a lot of that impact. And then two, it is hard to scale those, especially when a company is moving so quickly. So I would say there are some companies who use us alongside those systems. There are also many companies who would use us in lieu of those systems.
You're so eloquently spoken on this. I'll ask one more question on the competitive environment set, and then I'll turn it over to Noah for his. It feels like Clay also would want to be a competitor to you at some point in time, right? Because yes, they built the data first, and yes, they're limited by the tabular, but they're starting to figure that out. And I feel like they want everyone to build their go-to-market flows on top of them. When we talked to Everett, I think he actually mentioned relevance as a competitor. I was like, interesting. I never would have put the two in the same bucket. But
Yeah.
I'm curious how you look at the Clay kind of complement, competitor.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I don't doubt it will come up, and I think it'll come up with every system just because I think
Yes.
companies are moving so fast, and so I think the it used to be a conversation of I think RevOps would come in and say like, "Hey, I like this CRM, I like this call recorder, I like this communication platform," and I think now we're seeing the crossover between those systems be really high, and so I think you get a lot of this question of like, what tool stack do you play well with? Because we are rethinking everything because we have to.
Yes.
And so I think right now we play really well with Clay. And I think they use us, we use them. And I think a lot of people reach out to us saying, like, Clay said really good things about you, which we very much appreciate. Um, And I think there are a lot of overlap, especially in the way we often think about things. I think very workflow based, pulling context from multiple places. I still, if I talk to any customer and they're having questions about how do I do better enrichment, how do I do back end workflows really well, I will recommend Clay. And so I think I have no doubt that they are continuing to move in this direction. I think right now I would think of them as incredibly complementary, and most of our teams do as well.
I love it because most of the great, they may have invented the term GTM engineer, but the fact that other than Clay, your Dust's name is popping up a lot and people are starting to find it is really neat. Noah, I don't want to hold
No,
on.
no, this is
Great.
this is a good lead in because one of the things you said earlier was, we can do that. And I think the phrase we can do that has been the enemy for a lot of sales cycles because that's the confusion across the community that knows this space probably better than anybody within the GTM council. This is one of the challenges of what is the solution that I'm or what is the challenge I'm going to use this solution for. And it sounds to me that there's the folks that have been doing this on their own, building the one to many. Now the multiplayer approach comes into play. A lot of this, the next tier is that once you start orchestrating that layer, there's the I want insights, but then I want to make them actionable. So not only do I want to understand what's happening, then I want to build those agents. So that's that AI layer that you're going to build with agents to then go do the stuff. When you bucket that phrase, there is almost no AI player in the go-to-market tech stack today that doesn't kind of do something like that. And I think that's the challenge. So thinking through the ICP and the buyers that are looking at
Yeah.
Trust right now, what's the most common denominator across the folks that are buying it, or when it's being messaged out? What's the core problem that somebody be like, oh, that's the thing that I haven't been able to solve. That's what I need Dust for today. And given everything's going to change in a year or two as everything evolves, but like, what is that thing that's like, oh man, this is why I love it so much? Because this is also we hear the same things. Andy and I, people really like Dust. So what is it that it separates itself from other organizations out there doing somewhat similar things?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'll take those in the two parts. I think in terms of who is the ICP and the buyer, um, I would say it is horizontal, but I would say where we often, just given this is focused on go-to-market engineering, I would say RevOps often gravitates towards us. And I think that's similar across the board. I would say it is a team that is built around the operating efficiency of a large swath of people. And I think it is very clear. It's very easy to do the math of like, if I can make my sales team more efficient, I get this clear outcome. And so I think it is. Um, One, I think ROI, always very clear. I think the other piece is that is a team that sits across a lot of disparate tool systems and spends a lot of its time trying to connect them. And I think it is also a team that has it's part of their role and job to think through, here are all of the problems I want to solve. And I think a large part about AI is just like, what are the problems that I need to solve? And some part is creativity and like, if it's all limitless, what could we do? But I think there's a large part where people sort of like, hey, this is taking too long right now. Let me solve it. So I would say RevOps often gravitates towards us. I would say the other one is often IT CISOs. And I think part of that is often a question that comes up after everyone needs an AI strategy, but I think a lot of teams are often moving in that in very different directions. And I think it is hard to build a system that has proper, like, governance authentication across all tools. And I think that's often like IT is going to come in at some point later, but I think, and it often stems with them of, hey, there's too many systems. I'm trying to put something consolidated in place. But I think it's often led by them to say, hey, we want a horizontal place where people can safely interact with the systems. And I think so people don't have to claw back that efficiency later when either people are interacting with the data wrong or people are interacting with data systems incorrectly. So I would say those are the 2 teams where a lot of it is consolidated.
Got it. So you're basically building a solution for the professional user, somebody that has been playing around with this and understands the elements of what they now need to standardize, the one to many, governance is something that's just starting to rear its head, and I think it's probably going to be sitting for the
Mhm,
most part in the ops world.
mhm.
Uh, if you're going to be responsible for building the all, just ops is also the governance for most of the other GTM systems as well. So it's not
Yes.
surprising. But wait, is that right? Am I thinking about the right way? It's like for the folks that really know, you use dust. Is that kind of the right phrase?
I mean, I would love if that was synonymous in everyone's head. Hopefully within the next year it will be. I think in terms of buyer, yes, that's correct. But I would think of I think where often teams see the value is that it doesn't have to be that case with the user. And I think that is one of the things that I feel really strongly about Dust. And it is what brought me here is that I think a lot of AI tools out there are built for a very technical user. And I actually feel very strongly that not all of those gains should be concentrated in just a few people. And I think that is bad for most employees. It's also bad often for an organization. And so, yes, I think there are a lot of technical people who like very much gravitate towards the dust. Or if they're setting up systems, they can appreciate some of the back end like governance and permissioning that we have built in. But I think what you're also touching on is those teams often set up the system so they can put guardrails in place that then allow end users to be creative and build and create agents or skills and kind of change up their day, but the underlying data access, the things that should be consistent are.
Got it. So it's the I think like 10 15 years ago with the last great after the 2008 2009 collapse, there was a bunch of great innovation that came out, and one of the terms that was thrown around a lot was the consumerization of IT. It was that IT is no longer in the back office. It needs to be something that can be consumed and managed by the front end. And this was also kind of corollary to the ops roles becoming the sales ops and rev ops, those sort of building out because you could manage that go to market tech stack. You could impact the business from the front end. It's even now that you're also saying you don't also just need to be a super technical go-to-market engineer to do the things. And so it's really bringing GTM engineering to the masses. It's how do you do this in a scalable platform with the governance and all the other elements that you'd require around an enterprise platform. Right?
Yes. And I think I'll use one example of this. I was sitting with a head of sales and a head of RevOps the other day, and they're building out um, forecasting dashboards. And I think it's an easy problem that every salesperson cares a lot about. It's, hey, by the numbers, I'm pacing towards my number, and I don't want surprises 1 month in. Like, there are insights scattered across the org. Am I going to hit? How much faith should I have in my forecast? So forth. And I think that is a really it is both a complex and simple problem to solve depending on how deep you wanna go into it. But head of sales is starting to write, starting to build the agent, pulls in account context and says like, "Account, like this field is what we should pull on in Salesforce." RevOps chimes in and says, "Actually, for this, you don't want account, you want account underscore two." And I think this is a really good example of that is information that does shouldn't need to be sitting in every person's head. RevOps should be able to encode that in one system. Every sales manager, every leader should be able to build with that in mind and say like, "Hey, I'm building forecasting for my team. Um, updating Salesforce, the Salesforce schema, that is consistent. Any changes should be like diffused across the org. It doesn't need to be the responsibility of every end user to remember that if you can kind of encode that within an agent or a skill."
Yeah.
What is I really like that point, and I agree deeply with it. And it's happening. I think you touched on kind of the data taxonomy or the kind of the data hierarchy that's looking there. What what do companies need to be successful with Dust, right? So I think kind of in two buckets, maybe one is the data foundation,
Mhm,
and then the second one is the skill sets of the people that are buying and implementing it.
mhm. I would say yes, data foundation. I do want to not scare everybody because I think everybody has the problem of we don't have clean data and it takes a lot of time to build that. And I think this is a really I think this question often comes up of documentation. And I think like information retrieval usually hits in a couple different ways. You both want to find the information, you want to only find the correct information. And as net new information comes up, you also want to update the existing systems so they get cleaner over time. So not to scare anybody that they have to have flawless data to use Dust or any other AI platform. It always will help. Better context, cleaner context is always going to make a system work better. Um, but yes, I would say generally access to all of your data, properly set up permissions, letting teams kind of interact with it in the right way and put those guardrails in place. I would say the other part, because I spend a lot of times with people thinking about change management in their org. And I think one of the hard parts is that use of AI is really personal. And I think everyone has a different way they want to interact with it. People communicate in different ways, people translate knowledge in different ways. And I think that's often where it becomes tricky. And you kind of have to let people work in their own ways. And I think this is a system where I often um, will recommend if you're trying to solve something, like have an IC, have RevOps, have a manager all thinking about the problem. And I think you both want the voice of the IC because the person who is living that on a day to day basis might have changes that other people wouldn't interact. And I think we often see this, and we're building things into the system to account for this. But it's really easy if RevOps owns the system end to end, builds a problem in a silo. Um, there's 100 ICs on the team, 500 ICs on the team. You are not going to be able to understand the like nuance of each of the ways that they work. And so I think one, you need someone who has that interaction on a day-to-day
Agree.
basis to
Agree.
be able to communicate. And then we're also building things into the system, into Dust that help with that. So this concept of like reinforced agents or reinforced skills. And so basically it allows as a agent or skill is used by the end users, how do you give that signal back to the team operating it to say, hey, you, why would you? But maybe you didn't think about all of these other edge cases um, where this is being used in a different way. Builds that into the system. Here are kind of just like more insights on how it's being lived across an org.
I love how deeply you're thinking about change management. To me, it is almost everything. I think the people that I see struggle with AI adoption is, hey, we have an overloaded RevOps team. Here's some AI, go AIify yourself. And I always think, no, like you need the additional people that will sit with those reps, take feedback, and to your early point, be thinking about the productivity of the team. I think oftentimes RevOps is thinking, how do I design the tools and then just push them out. But for me, I think about like a change the business role where your job is to go sit with a function and that group of reps or a period of time and then automate as much of that out. So I think a lot of people when they get into this stuff realize that change management's a much bigger deal. And it's neat that you're actually starting to embed that in your product as well too.
Oh, I was just gonna say it's a hard problem to solve. It's much easier to build a workflow and it is very hard to change the way people work. And I think that's often why people start with the workflow and it's still where I would recommend. But I think for a lot of the orgs where we're seeing move the fastest, there's much more of an embedded like AI ops org and it's someone who's like deeply and intimately familiar with the problems is often sitting and pairing side by side with that team and working through that. And so that's often something we very much recommend. It's also something where Dust is very heavy on support, and I think a lot of times we wanna play that role
Yeah.
of, "Hey, if you don't have this function in place," like, we sit across all of these teams really changing the way AI works in their systems, like, "We can help you do this," but we'll still recommend that they put someone in an AI ops role.
What else? This is a great point, and I agree with it. What other best practices in rolling out Dust slash broader AI GTM transformation would you suggest for people? Because I always love when I say to a vendor, I'm going to implement it once. You've done it 500 times, so like please don't let me figure it out. So Gina, I'd love to hear what else
Yes.
you've seen that like works well versus works badly.
Yes. Um A bunch of things. One, I think there's a difference about, like, piloting it versus rolling it out. I think when you're piloting a tool, test what you need to test to feel, like, confidence in the decision long term. Is, like, the technical ability there? Does the product solve enough problems, not for right now, but later? Um, how is everything evolving? Because I think the world we're living in doesn't necessarily it certainly won't be the world we're living in 6 months, a year from now. I think as we're thinking about rolling it out, I think one of the things people often miss is this is gonna sound silly, but like tops down endorsement. I think
Yeah,
people Like, RevOps is in a building role. I have been a seller, I've been customer facing for a lot of my career, and I think there's always this, like, push and pull between, do I build the system to help me in the long term, or do I do the hundreds of tasks I need to do today? And I think it is really hard unless you feel both the freedom and the encouragement from your org to say, like, "Take the time, build it, and build it right." And I think that's where multiplayer and, like, why Dust is built for teams is really valuable, because if one person builds it right, the entire team can kind of take advantage of it. And so I kind of tend to think that the investment you're making in one place compounds farther than just doing it for yourself. I would
By the way,
say
I would really deeply agree with you on this. You're singing my language, which is so many times RevOps is fighting to drive change versus the executive. The executive team's like, "Why are you doing that? Why are you doing that?" Versus, "How can I help?" Or trying to really understand it. And I think it's so much different when you have a CEO, CRO that's not questioning, "Why do you need that person?" But they're saying, "How can I give you air cover to do this right?"
yes, and I think that's especially valuable now because I think a lot of teams are thinking about, like, AI ROI is just time savings. And I think some companies are very much at the stage where, hey, we want to improve margins. We're just trying to make things cheaper. We need to spend a lot of time on time savings. But I think that one undercuts, like, or ignores all of the work that, like, reps probably weren't doing to begin with. And then, like, CRM hygiene is an easy example of that. I do not like updating Salesforce. I don't think it's the most valuable part of my time, and also, I rarely get my hand slapped for not doing it, except for a few fields at a specific time windows, so I'm, like, disincentivized to do it. The value of that to teams is not, "Hey, my reps are spending 25 minutes a day updating Salesforce." I will speak for myself, I wasn't doing it to begin with. The downstream impact is probably better data hygiene. I think that's an example of people are focusing on time savings and they're like, "Where is it going?" I think the better impact is like, your data is clean and you can make better decisions. I think I think that's one thing on, like, time savings. I think the other question is, like, how can you repurpose that? And I think there is so much competition out there for every company these days. There's a lot of fear in the space. And so I think any time back, if you can reinvest that into your company and that people giving people the tools to, like, dig in and do more, that is more valuable than it has ever been before. And I think the value of a great employee who is, like, uncapped has, like, never been higher. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I think about, like, this is really where you need to be investing, like, giving the right people the right tools to do whatever they need to do.
Yeah, you might be, this is being recorded, right? So you might be the first person on record to admit not updating Salesforce. So I
Oh, I
make sure,
am yes, I'm fine to do that
I,
one. Yes, I've got my hand slapped before, but yes, I don't update Salesforce as often as I should, and now, thankfully, I have agents to do it for me.
I was gonna say I remember the other guest we asked, "What's the biggest one GTM advice?" He's like, "Reps should not enter data anymore." Like, period, full stop in this world.
yeah. The change management piece that you mentioned is fascinating because I think what you're also doing is you are enabling everybody in ops. Well, I'm going to take a step back. So the future of ops is just going to be GTM engineering and ops is just going to be synonymous. And I think what you're doing is facilitating that. You're allowing everyone to become a GTM engineer. The comment around only certain people in ops know the nuance of this field, and you have to use this filter in this case, right? That source of truth data sits with ops because of that challenge. You're getting rid of some of those barriers. Um, the change management that you offer companies, do you offer when companies are buying, this is a new way of doing things, even within this newest way of doing things. So you're right, you're adding a little bit of complexity. And you mentioned you have a lot of support folks. What are the processes you all have to help with that change management for companies going through this, being like, man, we got a lot of people. We're going this way. That's how we got here. We now need to kind of change it in the next path. Where does your organization spend time, either during the onboarding piece, or do you have a managed services sort of solution that you offer? How do you get companies over that hump, that nervousness of, this is something that I don't feel as comfortable with now?
And Noah, by the way, started a brand new job a month ago, so I think he may be needing some change
No,
management.
yeah, I'm also taking notes.
Congrats, Noah. Um, yeah, I think we work really closely with a subset of our customers, and I think everyone is trying to figure this out. And I think it kind of starts with probably what problem are you trying to solve? And I think a lot of people are at different places. I think some are trying to say, like, hey, we have a bunch, like 10% of our org is sprinting super fast on AI. We're trying to make the rest catch up. And I think other ones are, hey, we are seeing governance issues in like other systems. How do we kind of like crawl that back and set us up for scale? So I do think part of it is where the individual org is. But I would generally think it kind of depends if you're building for like RevOps or the individual user. And I spend a lot of time with both. And I think if you are an IC, my encouragement is always going to be start small, pick one agent that you know super, super well. And I think it's really hard to build an agent if you don't know what good looks like. And so I think if you are the person who is just directly responsible for it, it takes up a lot of your time. It's your least favorite task, and you know what good looks like. I would recommend every person start there. Um, I think it is hard to understand kind of the nuances around how AI works without playing with it. And so I will always recommend, and I see like pick something you are so familiar with and start breaking it apart into a problem. And I think it often, once you kind of get past that first hurdle of fear, it all becomes a lot simpler. And I think you can start with a work task, you can start with a personal task, like whatever makes the most sense in your head. And usually, what I start with people is you can kind of break any agent up into a couple specific components. It's kind of like, what is the trigger originating event? What is like, where does that information come from? Is it from multiple sources? Is it one source? Um, who should receive that information and where? And kind of how do you want to transform that information in order to get it to be the right output? And I think every agent, every workflow kinda works like that, but I think that's usually where I start with, like, individuals is pick one thing that's small, make it really great because I think it's really easy to get an agent that is 60% of the way there. It is really hard to get one that's, like, 99% of the way there, and I think you can learn a lot of the things that you need to about how systems work by just getting one example to great, and if you think about how that works, you can kind of extrapolate that across the board. I think if I was working with kind of the people setting up systems, it is once you've connected all your data, once you've made sure that people should only can only access the information that they should, I think it is what are kind of like the universal rules in your org. So, how should you update your Salesforce? How should you pull data from your systems? I candidly am not great at SQL. That was the reason I joined Dust. Was um, the fact that I can natural language prompt our Snowflake database and access any information I want is wild for me. But I think having those systems in place, so people can kind of safely play is important. And then I would kind of start working my way through what is every possible task um, that a salesperson, a success person needs to do on a day-to-day basis. And I think the underlying kind of components of that are often very similar. And if they're more modular, if they're more composable, it kind of like sets you up for scale. So I usually will start there. And in terms of support our team does, it's a lot. It works with each org, hackathons, on-sites, office hours, like what people need, we'll do our best to support.
Question for you on we've touched on a couple bits, but we haven't got deep, and I'm really curious your take on this, Gina, which is the UX that you deliver this in. As I understand it, and some of our guests have talked about how they use Dust in Slack. I also understand you may have your own like dashboard type of area. I'm curious, like you must have been thinking through what are the best practices on UX, what works, what doesn't, and rolling things out. So I'd be fascinated for your experience, your take on that.
I'm so all in on Dust. I, like, spend 10 hours a day in our website. Um, that's not how most teams work, and I think that's where, um, most teams interact with it just in Slack.
Mhm.
And I think it kinda depends where people are, but um, I think there is a big push from teams to say, "Hey, not only do I not want my reps updating Salesforce, I don't want my reps like spending time in Salesforce. And so I think a lot of teams are often, we have a capability called frames, similar to Claude's artifacts. It's um, like a visual artifact. Um, Used in a bunch of different ways. Teams either use it to kind of like create external facing collateral. You can create dashboards internally. You can use it in a bunch of different ways. But I think there is a lot of teams just trying to like focus their team's energy and saying like, hey, here's the entire world you need to exist in. So from the morning you wake up, it is here's how I run my day. Here's my calendar in one place. Here's my Slack digest. Here are all of the accounts that need attention. Here is kind of the insights and everything pulled for you. So I would say a lot of teams are calling it ad hoc in Slack. Uh, I think the where I love Slack. I use it for everything. Um, I don't know that it's the best place to be able to visualize information all in one place. So it kind of depends what problem you're solving for. If you're trying to like translate information to reps at a scheduled basis, easy to send information there. If you're trying to use it as a chatbot and get information ad hoc, really great for that. When I'm starting to think about like, hey, I have 120 tasks to do today, what are the most important ones? Slack is like not the way I can wrap my head around that.
I deeply agree with you. I don't know if you remember. I may be one half generation older or a full, but it's Troops existed, which was it got bought by Salesforce, and it was you can wire it up and you can send anything to Slack, and we all looked like heroes for the first week, but
Yes.
after that, we all it was like all of our reps were like, but it's overwhelming, and I think your point was spot on, which was if I'm trying to prioritize what the reps should work on with Slack, I can push it in, but I can't take it back out very easily, and so and it's this feed that is just there forever, even if I've acted on it. And so I think, are you seeing the best teams using Dust moving more to a Dust type dashboard interface? It sounds like you have in most cases. Or how do you think like where do you think it'll evolve to? Because I do think Slack has limitations in how it's designed.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think the best part of Slack is that it is collaborative and it is very good at real-time information. Um, and I think a lot of where you want to use Slack is just like bringing things in there. It is harder to make it like the UX that like encompasses a bunch of different systems. I would say it's a good question. I would say one of the things that we are recently launched, it's starting to get rolled out, it will continue to launch, is a new feature called Pods. And I think it is incredibly collaborative. And I think that is something we are starting to invest in really heavily because I
Mhm.
think it's really a space for humans and agents to kind of like work in one place together. And so I think that is I think one of the harder things about Dust is it's kinda hard to wrap your head around because it's so flexible, but I think there are a bunch of things baked into the system that are, like, very modular, very composable, can be used in a bunch of different ways. And I think Pods is one of the new pieces of that, and people are starting to use it in a bunch of different ways, and I'll give you a couple examples. One is new hire onboarding. How do you kind of get a workspace that is tailored to you? Your manager can pre-set it up with, hey, here is your onboarding guide, everything you need to know, all of your company data in one place, in a place where you can like interact with it. Other use easy iteration is I have a pod for every single one of my customers' context.
Yep.
And so I have like a daily sync. It pulls in like chatter from the internal Slack channel, from the external Slack channel, any HubSpot data, information from a lot of sources. I just have it run every morning and say like, get if I missed anything. But I think that conversation place and like having a place where I can like store a bunch of details that are easy to update, easy to write to is really helpful because it also allows me to closely track like what information have I sent to them. And so I think like one example that I've been thinking through right now is when you're communicating with your customer, like almost all of a salesperson's job, a post salesperson's job is communicating so much information, but up until the point that it becomes noise. And I think that is product roadmap, feature updates, how you can use the product, especially for something like dust. And so a lot of that information that can be like large systems is like, what use cases have I given them? What tech stack is good for them? It is also like, what are they using Dust for? Um, the CRM is hard to use that for. And so I'm using often pods to store what is every piece of company context I have with them, what is the latest on every customer conversation, what is their tech stack in a way that I can send tailored updates to any person at the company and get like a really clear answer. I'm like, hey, for this person at this role with this usage, how can I recommend the best next steps? And I think that is hard to do at scale. Um, but those are kind of like the systems that if you invest the time in, they're really valuable. Last example I'll give you is in terms of collaboration. Um, we recently raised a new round. The comms about that touches a large amount of our team finance, CEO, marketing, sales, so forth. We ran 100% of that process within a pod because everyone can be in that pod together, act on that same corpus of work, easily ask in a chat, like, hey, what's the latest on this? What did I miss? And also, like, assign tasks to other people to say, hey, you are a dependency on my work. Hey, I need you for this. And you can easily kind of translate information across an org.
Whew, let me add one little thing here. So orchestration around customer comms is one headache. Like I almost, I don't anticipate with great affection the getting a new vendor because I'm going to get swarmed with so many communications that are just for everybody, and the system kicks off something and somebody else reaches out. That orchestration around customer comms is a massive gap today. And I like that because oftentimes people are using different communication channels and there really isn't that customer data hub to link it all together. But the other one you just mentioned, the last comment, is I think something that I don't know if companies spend enough time in, which is it's the internal comms, the cascading communications as it goes through a company. The hardest thing to scale is making sure that everybody in the company understands what everybody at the top of the company who's spending in meetings designing the comms, that you connect those two. And so creating this pod concept, not only for internal but external comms, I'll buy that tomorrow. I'll send you my credit card info. I love it.
I feel like Slack is there is a need to you said something a couple minutes ago, Gina, which I really liked, which was humans and agents collaborating in one space together. And I feel like there is a need for a new medium that is not Slack. Like just to set up a new Slack Connect channel or to collaborate with a customer is so clunky. I know we all have it, and the other thing that I love about it is it's so easy to plug in a new feed into it, and so it's so easy to take the first step. And I think it'll be hard for somebody to replace it, but it's neat that you guys are experimenting with, like, an addition to rather than a replacement for. Um, so a lot of the people we work with and talk with in GTM Council, they're like super deep Claude Code fluent, building their own agents, maybe without the dust harnesses and things like that. I'm curious on like the lock-in and the flexibility, and because it strikes me as you've built a more user-friendly N8N that's probably more capable, and so I'm excited for that, and I think a lot of people will use it. But does this restrict me over time?
It's a good question. I think we've built the system in a way that it shouldn't. And I think like a good example is like, yes, everyone's very heavy on Claude Code. We get a lot of questions about it. I think for the last 5 months, the news cycle, the hype is all about Claude. But I think a lot of that is also even switching back. And so I think like for our engineering team, a lot of shifts already to Codex, back to other tools. I think if there is any one thing true, it's that people have a hard time predicting the future right now, especially with the rate of change. And so I think in some ways, yes, lock in, but I would say in others, far less than other systems because of the ability to take advantage of the latest models, use it so flexibly, so forth. I would say a lot of where I think we get a lot of questions about Claude Code, Cowork, so forth. And I think what I have usually seen is that either it is the super AI pilled person sprinting super fast ahead and kind of those gains not necessarily translating across the org, or people just getting more familiar with AI because it's so easy to use. And I actually think that is net positive for a lot of people, is just like this increased familiarity and being able to play with systems. Um, and so I think all of that is valuable. We're still at the very early stages of using AI, and I think the more people are using um, tools, the better. So, in some ways, sure, it's a new tool, it's one place to onboard. Um, but I would say that's the case for every tool right now is, hey, you're making an investment. And I think for almost every AI tool, like it feels like you should be able to wave a magic wand and it solve all your problems. And I think the time to encode a system is hard, and that's gonna be hard no matter what system you have, and it will take time, and I think, I often joke that the fastest way would like, I wanna get onboarded at one of my customers so that I can, like, help them build everything just because it takes so much time to say, like, "What is the world of information I should know, and how do I build those systems into a place?" That's gonna be tricky no matter what system you're building in.
Well said. Noah, you got one final question, and then we'll.
Um,
I could ask Gina questions forever, but go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. So the I think the other part of your response to your the question that you're answering, which is yeah, maybe you can as an isolated Cloud Code user, you can do more, have flexibility, but when governance comes into the conversation, it's gonna regardless of what you do, whatever sort of technology you engage on, but if you're talking an enterprise platform, you're gonna need the governance around it, and that's always gonna create some sort of cap in that element. So you are gonna sacrifice, but I think that's platform agnostic if you're gonna go that route. Um, One of the challenges, I think everybody that's jumping in as an agent, so you're creating a bunch of agents across, excuse me, a bunch of GTM engineers across the organization. And everywhere I've seen this so far, you start seeing the same agent built by 1,000 different people. I think that discovery of what else is out there. And you made an earlier point, which was really good. I don't want to miss it, which was you really need to know what good looks like. And you need to have you need to build purposely. And so the experimentation often goes against that because people may not know what that looks like. And so that ability to share those best practices, and maybe that's part of what the pod is encountering, but getting those folks to understand what good looks like, what other people are doing in a way which isn't just here's all the agents in a list, scroll through and see if there's one applicable to you. How do you solve that? Because you are going to create this sprawl of agents. How do you think about that when you're creating when everyone becomes a GTM engineer?
100%. So I think one piece is like encode the systems because I think it is more dangerous. Like you can have 5 call prep agents. There is noise in there. I think there is benefits in having one great one, and that can kind of be encoded in a skill within our system. Everyone can call it. So it's not just like the 5 people who built the agent, everyone can use it. Um, I think that sprawl still exists. And I think this is where you kind of need to also work closely with teams because I think that there's a lot of tools in our space, and we're about to release a couple more in a few weeks to allow you to have like greater control over who can build an agent, who can publish an agent, who can build a skill versus publish a skill, so forth. And we are also doing some things in the tool to say, like, you can just ask like the generic Dust agent, like, how do I solve this? And it will say, like, here are all the agents in your workspace that already solve this problem. Or, hey, you're trying to solve this. There are skills that will automatically appear and say, like, hey, I'm trying to like prep for my day. And it will say, like, using the existing call prep skill. That's when we have for like, hey, I'm trying to like figure out our ARR for the day. It will automatically bring in our ask data questions skill. Um, and so I think one, discovery is really hard, but one of the things that we're like very focused on at the moment. The second is around like there are guardrails, but I think you don't want to limit everyone right at the beginning because I think the value of having an idea and having that be a great one and then having to say like worst case scenario, there's too many great ideas. And so often I work with teams and be like, hey, you have 5 call prep agents. Let's consolidate this into one great skill. And I'll tell you the 5 people who are like, we should just say, like, hey, heads up. use this one. Is there any reason you need this other one? It does the exact same thing. But I think there's a lot of creativity that you can limit if you don't have that. And I think a good example is one of our AEs here, um, we have very different brains. His is amazing, works in such different ways. He loves comic books. He is mass sending comic books to increase like pipe gen to everyone in his book. They are personalized. Has like pulls images of you, kind of like creates a narrative arc. It's booking meetings. That is so not something I would ever in a million years think of. We don't have 5 of those, but I think you don't wanna limit the creativity that comes with that, and I think limiting that is, like, harder, than doing, like, an audit of your space and just saying, like, "Hey, let's merge these 2."
I love that. Yeah, we've heard that from some other guests too, which is you still want those laboratory of ideas versus
Mhm.
I think ideation can be distributed, but
Mhm.
like execution may need to be centralized. And
Yes.
so that's a great way to, if you shut that off, that's so well said.
Yeah.
Well, Gina, thank you for the time. I've been excited for this one for a while. And I just pulled up your funding announcement that talks about single player versus multiplayer, which is a post we had about 3 or 4 weeks ago, right when you guys did it, and we hadn't seen it before. But I think single player is hard. Multiplayer, if I think now, Dust is one of those places that can get people over that hurdle. So, congratulations and look forward to more fun conversations.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.